Hi folks, I'm interviewing the founder and director of Weather Action, an ex-Labour councillor and activist, and I think probably most notoriously at this point, the brother of Jeremy Corbyn, Piers Corbyn. Piers, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, and it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you so much. So I guess we'll start on the Extinction Rebellion question, since this is your area of specialist expertise. I don't want to get into the debate about climate science because I'm not qualified.
Okay.
But what do you make of the political activism of Extinction Rebellion so far?
Well, as a big headline, I would say that climate policy is there to control you, not to control climate, and that applies to everybody watching this programme. The political origin of them is the globalist supranationals. The mega rich, they're funded by George Soros, among others. He spent $24 million on the groups which set up the so-called climate strike. They are orchestrated by the mainstream media and tolerated deliberately by all the governments in the world, just about by very few. You see, look, if you and I were to have a demonstration about Yemen, the war and arms and so forth, we would be swept off the street within half an hour, right? Or if the miners' strike had tried to occupy London like they did, they would have had the horses against them straight away. They'd be swept away. So they are completely tolerated by the powers that be, and the purposes of it are now clear, because there's calls in the media and Prince Charles for the leading institutions, banks and so forth, to spend trillions, well, certainly billions, but trillions is a figure from the World Economic Forum, on combating climate change. Now, what's it to do? It's to give huge amounts of money to large organisations, mega corporations, to build wind farms or develop more unnecessary batteries or whatever. And at the same time, it will be handouts to the, to the banks and so forth, who are otherwise going to be facing a big economic crisis. Not
entirely dissimilar to 2008 and the housing crisis there.
That's right. There's a big crisis coming. Obviously, the climate stuff has got more to it than just the banks, but it's a way of handing out money to failing businesses in the West who are suffering under China and India's competitiveness.
Really, that's a really fascinating way of looking at it, because most people don't view it as I guess what you're essentially saying is a sort of transfer of wealth from the taxpayer to the top.
Oh yeah. Look, the United Nations talks about redistribution of wealth. But if you look at it, it's redistribution upwards, absolutely upwards. The more and more the globalists are taking power and influence under the guise of the United Nations and the European Union to redistribute wealth, it's redistribution upwards, and the poor in the world are getting poorer and poorer, and the super rich are getting richer and richer. The development of the third world is being held back by climate policies, which are racist. Because, for example, African women, because of lack of electricity, due to the International Monetary Fund policies and others, climate policies, they have lack of electricity because they don't have coal-fired power stations, so they spend a lot of their lives over open cooking fires, and that kills them. 1 million women die a year in Africa due to smoke inhalation.
I did not know that. But I mean, one of the things that I've noticed about the founders of, say, the Green New Deal and Extinction Rebellion is that they both openly say that their movements are actually not about climate change. They're actually about social justice. And that seems to tie in exactly with what you're saying here.
Well, it does. You see, the United Nations itself admits that. Edim Offenhar, who I can give you the reference, but it was in 2010 in a Swiss newspaper, and he was the chairman of one of these intergovernmental panel on climate change working groups. He said that one has to get rid of the idea that we're here as an environmental movement. We're almost completely not that. Our aim is redistribution of wealth. Undefined, but it's about globalist control and globalist exploitation.
Yeah, and it's very much...
Things like the European Union, open borders. Look, Tony Blair doesn't want open borders to help anybody who's coming or staying here. He wants open borders to hold down wages in Britain. And the mega corporations want open borders to destroy the British working class and remove industry from Britain and sending it to places where workers can be even more exploited. There'll be super exploitation of steel workers in India or
Absolutely.
or whatever.
Yeah,
That's what it's about.
And
it's
it's
not to help anybody here. So, you know, the European Union, United Nations, and the climate change propaganda, which we're in subject to now, are all from the same source. Globalist, mega corporation, world domination.
It's very interesting because I mean, it's very obvious that the agenda to devalue labour in Britain is in full steam, and that's the purpose of open borders. And the idea of moving manufacturing overseas, where the profit margins are even greater because the people can be paid pennies, it's crystal clear. But what I find really interesting are the people I'm going to generously term the useful idiots of the climate movement, because I went down to a bunch of these Extinction Rebellion protests, and the people there were very nice and very concerned about the climate. They did not seem to have any sort of communist signs or activism about them. And so I talked to them, and they just gave me absolutely no indication that they understood that the founders of these movements don't care about the climate. They just seem to be completely in the dark about all of this, and they never question why they're in synchronicity with policies from people like Goldman Sachs.
I know.
You know, it's such a peculiar thing, isn't it?
Well, it is. You see, well, they're brainwashed by the BBC 24/7. But the worrying thing is that youth these days aren't questioning. A lot of them are questioning nothing.
Yeah.
You know, and I was on those demonstrations too, against them, of course, and we holding up placards. You know, that there's no such thing as man-made climate change, CO2 is good for you and stuff like that, because it's the gas of life and we need it for more plants to grow faster. And some children were coming up to us, mostly 12-year-olds. They were really interested. Oh, mummy, what's this? You know what I mean? And they were talking, they were interested children. But a lot of them who were 17, they were just completely glazed over, brainwashed. Oh, so you support Donald Trump then, do you? And I said, look, he supports us, right? We had these views before he was around, right? So, you know, I mean, but they have a raft of ideology to hold people together. You see, if you oppose the European Union, then you must support Donald Trump and you support plastic in the sea. No, because all these things is complete nonsense. I mean, I'm against plastic in the sea. I've got many views of Donald Trump's policies, but he supports us on climate. Okay, well, that should be good, shouldn't it? I mean, you know, because we are scientists and we actually have understanding of what's happening, unlike the various would-be pop stars and celebs who fly around the world to tell us not to fly around the world.
Yeah, it's very ironic. And they are, as you say, very low information activists. They've got a very, very paper-thin narrative that they have to follow. And if you can punch a hole in that, then the whole thing just falls apart.
No, we did recruit a few people. I mean, some of them, like funnily enough, the true Greens, I call them, or the real Greens, you know, are really totally green. Some of them are, oh yeah, okay, and they do listen to what we say. You know, we point out that actually electric cars are making bigger CO2 footprints, so-called, than petrol cars. And I said, oh, really? You know what I mean? So some of them have come over to us and said, yeah, all right, we're going to leave out the CO2 narrative and we're going to just fight for true green policies like defending biodiversity, defending hedgerows, defending trees, you know, stuff like that.
So one of the things that I found very suspicious about the sort of this modern climate movement is the reluctance to engage with the idea of nuclear power. Because I'm no scientist, but I looked it up and it turns out that nuclear power is the safest, causes the fewest deaths, and is the most productive by far. So just from a common sense perspective, it looks like we should be investing in that. Is that correct? Or?
Well, yeah, I think there's many questions about nuclear power and new ways of using nuclear power, developing it, different from the, you know, old, well, the ones that produce plutonium, those sort of reactors. I think there is you know, the thorium type of reactors. There is a very good argument for them. I'm not completely convinced because whatever, there's going to be issues involving the places themselves, if they're bombed and disposal, which they claim they've largely solved, but I don't know. But it's true that people just ignore that. However, there is a general truth, though, that with the so-called climate movement attacks that have been going on for years, nuclear power in general has become a lot more popular, and coal has gone downhill. Now, you see, coal, there's plenty of it in Britain, it's cheap, it's easy to mine, relatively, and it can be made clean in the sense all the smoke with modern equipment in modern power stations can be removed. So that is what we should be using. We should be using coal and oil. Nuclear, including thorium now, I think is more expensive, and certainly all the so-called green solutions are very expensive. Whatever they tell you about the coming drop in costs, they're still very expensive now.
Yeah.
All those things should be experimental now, if you like. You can have experimental things on solar power, but to make people pay for these expensive ideas for some completely false belief is very bad. And also it means more and more exploitation of children in the Congo, who are forced down mines to get this stuff out for mobile phones and the expensive materials used in for all sorts of these processing things for solar power and also in wind farms.
Yeah, and then you've got the wider geopolitical ramifications of encouraging China further into Africa to get the resources to make
of course.
the component.
Well, the Chinese have got a lot of the stuff as well, but actually China, with its influence in Africa, are going to be cornering all these rare earths, actually.
Yeah.
And the West is going to be left standing. But you see, what are the West doing to help real African people? I mean, apart from making them die, as I said, in,
very little
smoke-filled rooms. I mean, the West should be in the forefront of building coal-fired power stations, but they're not. It's actually China in South Africa that's doing it.
It looks very much like we're pulling up the ladder, actually, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So the political expression of the climate movement at the moment, I find to be highly dubious, disingenuous in many ways, and full of useful idiots. And I suppose that's where we should probably come to talk about the Labour Party. So tell me about your opinion on the current trajectory of the Labour Party, because it seems to have been captured by John McDonnell and his activists and Momentum, and I find these people to be dangerous, I think.
Well, I think your criticism is very strongly reflected around the country. See, I do a lot of travelling for the talking about the climate issue, but as part of the bigger picture, as in various media, but Mark Windows and so on, and people interested in the Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030, from which springs Extinction Rebellion. So I talk to a lot of people, and we get Labour Party people involved too, and I go to Labour meetings, and I spoke, for example, at the Peterloo anniversary in Manchester. So I know quite a lot of Labour people, and they reflect exactly what you say. The activists now are, as you say, feeling, tricked.
Yeah.
I mean, the Labour Party has now been taken over by, at the top anyway, or near the top, sort of the upper middle levels, by, raging Remainists, frankly, who are selling out Britain's heritage to the European Union.
I couldn't agree more. And they seem to be distinctly ideological as well. John McDonnell has admitted to being a Marxist and has said on the BBC that his job is to overthrow capitalism. And for all its faults, I do think that capitalism's the best we've got. I agree that there should be a more equitable distribution of wealth, but I don't think that simply eating the rich is the answer there. But I don't think
it might not taste nice, either.
Well, yeah, but I think John McDonnell's salivating at the idea, and I think that has really severe knock-on consequences. But how much of this do you think is your brother's influence, or do you think he's been essentially had the party commandeered from underneath him?
Well,
if you can answer that,
I can't really answer that because it's not very clear to me anyway. But I would say that he is surrounded by people who have a an agenda which is really very pro-EU and very Remainist, and in the end would be the opposite to the trajectory which he set out to achieve when he got elected as leader. So I think he's got a lot of difficult things to balance. But I would say one thing, you see that, okay, I dare say all these Remainists would prefer another leader. I'm certain of that, right? But they want him to get votes, okay? But if whatever happens at the next election, whenever it is, and I don't think it will be in December, whatever happens, there's going to be an issue between Britain and the European Union if we've remained or exited or under discussion.
Yeah.
And who is going to be best to do those negotiations? It's certainly not going to be Boris Johnson, whose heritage is, you know, privatise the NHS or whatever, you see, or assist American companies from doing it. I don't know. There's all sorts of scare stories on that. But you see, Boris Johnson won't be good, whereas my brother would be, you know, very good, because he understands the European Union. He understands world politics very, very, very well. And he's driven by a desire to get the best deal for the United Kingdom working class, and wants to redistribute wealth downwards. And where things need to be nationalised, like the railways, he would do. Now, some of what John McDonnell says probably fits well into that, but other things that John McDonnell says, which is kind of, you know, prayers to the European Union, are not going to work, because the European Union would not allow nationalisation of railways, which is, you know, even Tory voters in Britain want that now, whereas in Europe there's been demonstrations against the European Union trying to force privatisation of railways in France.
One of the things that people don't realise is that most of our major rail lines are owned by French and German companies.
I know, that's what the hell?
So it's, A, it's crazy, and B, you can see exactly why the European Union doesn't want the nationalisation of the railways. And just for anyone who's curious, I use the trains all the time, and they're atrocious, and I remember what they were like when they were nationalised, and they were not this bad.
No,
they were not this expensive, and it, from a market perspective as well, from like the capitalist point of view, it makes sense to nationalise the railways, because they're a natural monopoly.
It can even be a sensible capitalist policy for most businesses, because it gets workers to work on time for less money. I mean, that's it.
And the money, any profit that they make goes into the exchequer. So, you know,
which cuts taxes.
Exactly, which cuts taxes. So there are lots of good free markets, and based in principle as well. It is a natural monopoly. You can't, like, I've got one choice of railway provider, train provider to get here on. It's Great Western.
Well, that's right. I mean, there's not a choice of on any particular route. There isn't a choice. You've got to go on that route, right?
Yeah. So there are some really strong arguments for it, and I think that's a very sensible thing. But getting back to Jeremy's positions compared to John McDonnell's, I find this interesting because, like you were saying before we started the conversation, Jeremy was a big fan of Tony Benn, and I've got to say, I'm quite a fan of Tony Benn, especially when he's talking about accountability in the European Union. And I find that Jeremy seems to have done essentially a kind of 180 from his old positions, because listening to some of his critiques of the European Union going back into the 90s and early 2000s, I'm very on board with the things that he's saying. They say he sounds like a UKIPper, you know, when he's like, no, I completely agree with exactly what he's saying on all of these critiques. And then suddenly he's surrounded by very hardcore sort of internationalist, pro-Remain activists, and suddenly he's got to be silent on the issue and take their position. I mean, I guess that a lot of people must be thinking this is eating him up, because this must be a very frustrating position for him to be in.
Well, as I said, activists in the Labour Party that I've met say exactly that thing, and they are distressed by it. I mean, they say to me, what does your brother think? No, I can't answer questions like that, because it's up to him to. Anyway, if I could, what would it mean anyway? I mean, I can't.
No, that's fair.
But you know, obviously he is in a difficult position.
Yeah.
But I think he has, of all the politicians at that level, he's the most genuine one there.
I suppose that attests to his popularity with his activists.
I mean, you know, I say genuine there. Well, he is, you know, in his heart, he is a genuine person that wants to do the best. Whereas most other politicians, they're there for themselves. You see, if my brother had been out to be the leader from day one, he wouldn't have done it this way. He wouldn't have gone it this way.
No.
Because he was always on the back benches, refusing positions, because they would have, undermined his commitment to various things for equal pay and for fair treatment and non-exploitation around the world.
Worker interests,
of course.
And this is another thing that I've spoken to many people who are, I guess, ex-Labour supporters now because of the direction.
Yeah,
that
I've
the
met
Labour
some
Party's
that have
taking.
joined the Brexit Party.
Yeah,
and they ain't going to come back unless there's some change.
Yeah, but one of the things that they've noticed is that the Labour Party seems to have become a bourgeois urban party that seems to broadly despise working class white men, actually. And this is reflected in a lot of the pro-diversity rhetoric and action that's coming out of the Labour Party. The thing that always sticks in my mind is when they were going to have some sort of conference, and they were going to charge for entrance black people a different amount to white people. And that, to me, I mean, to get to that point, like, there's got to have been some serious ideological corruption there. If they actually know black people can pay less, and that's totally wrong. And what do you feel about that?
I think it's terrible. See, that's a sort of very arrogant type of thing. I mean, it's immediately assuming they somehow need help and inferior or something, which is appalling. Now, when you have these differentials for charging, it should be based on working or not working, or students and pensioners, that sort of stuff, reductions. But
that would make complete sense because it's something tangible that you can say corresponds to economic reality.
But it's insulting as well. I mean, I know, plenty of black people who are, like Trevor Phillips, known him from a long time in Imperial College. Well, I mean, he's doing all right.
He needs a
Why should he walk in and pay half what I do? I don't know. I mean, it's ridiculous. He wouldn't anyway. He'd demand to pay the full price, I'm sure. But it's
that's the thing.
It's
not. I don't think it's black people in general who are saying this. I actually think it's middle class white activists who are saying that, and But the shift in the Labour Party is very clearly away from like a kind of. Almost a kind of like political union for the working classes of Britain towards a more bourgeois, idealistic perspective, where they're very much based in the main cities. I mean,
no, that's completely true.
Yeah, that's just the impression I've had.
And the same has happened in America, of course.
Yes,
you see,
the Democrats,
American Democrats have just given up on the Rust Belt.
Yeah,
and of course, Trump, who they describe as far right, is hoovering up votes from the dispossessed working class who've had their industry stolen.
Yeah.
And the same will happen in the north of England to the Brexit Party unless, Labour is clear that they support the decisions of the referendum and want a real Brexit. And in my opinion, you can negotiate how you want, but just so long as you say to the European Union we ain't going to leave until we've got a deal, then they're going to hang around. I mean, if Britain left and said, OK, we've left, now what? Then the European Union would come to us to negotiate.
It is entirely...
And we've got to have a proper relationship with the European Union.
Of course.
But, we would hold the cards if we leave.
And it is incredibly frustrating watching everyone just give the European Union decision-making power in this regard by demanding, and I just can't stand it. Honestly, it's becoming like nails on a chalkboard now. Because I mean, the Labour Party said that in their manifesto they were going to respect the result of the referendum,
which is great.
So essentially, they had to.
I was campaigning for Labour with my brother. I was on his bus at times, even. You know, I mean.
So they've kind of got to admit that they're a Brexiteer party. They have to be pro-Brexit. And I mean, I don't even know what to say. It's insulting to me as a voter.
Well, the ruling class's main aim is to prevent my brother becoming Prime Minister. And of course, surrounding him with this Brexit nonsense and maybe even a Brexit election is the way to do it. Now, I don't think there will be a Brexit election before Christmas. I mean, I would say about it that it's a profoundly anti-family and undemocratic to sort of thrust upon people just a week or so before Christmas, you've got to decide this stuff. I mean, it's appalling. look, the reason why we have elections in normally summer is because it's easy to travel around. There's not, you know, stress for this or that event and so forth. So it's profoundly anti-democratic, for one thing. The other thing is, though, there'll be massive disinterest. And the main people voting are going to be politicos of various sorts. And that means it's going to become polarised between no-deal Brexit and Remain or Boris's deal, which in fact is just to remain camouflaged, and it's to surrender to make the United Kingdom into a colony of the EU. So, but during the 3 or 4 weeks of election campaigning, that will become exposed, and people will realise, my God, this is what Boris's deal means. Well, they're going to. It's worse than Remain. It's treachery. The European Union has got bad things about it we didn't realise, and they'll vote for the Brexit Party.
I think
this is the last thing the ruling circles want. So I don't think they're going to let this election happen. They're going to. It'd be better, I would say, for let Parliament muddle on and just muddle on until we get a point where
the EU kicks us out.
Yeah, well, we can be kicked out, have a no-deal Brexit, then they will talk to us.
But this is honestly, it's my fundamental problem with Jeremy Corbyn's position on this, is that he won't agree to an election until no-deal Brexit is taken off the table. And that is the primary card in our hand when dealing with the European Union. And so, I mean, you know, obviously you don't agree with Boris on a lot of things, but he has at least been firm on the point that he's not taking that off the table, but he's obviously having his hands tied by Parliament. So legally, there's very little he can do. But you can tell that the impetus within him is,
well,
you know.
Historically, when Jeremy was a trade union leader, or not a trade union leader, a trade union official, he was very effective at negotiating. And I wouldn't have imagined he'd ever take anything off the table. But he might have told them to take some things off the table, but, you know, he would keep all his cards on the table, under his chest. But
now we're in this position, aren't
well, I think, you know, we should be going by the original mandate of the last election myself. There's many ways of interpreting no to no deal, of course, and that is the difficulty, because no to a dangerous deal, well, sorry, no to a dangerous no deal. Well, of course, no one wants anything dangerous, but you know, I think we have to be clear that there's been a lot of preparations already made by both sides. And my guess is if we had a no-deal Brexit on October the 31st, you walk into Sainsbury's, there'd be no difference. No difference at all. It might be they'll have more Somerset brie and less French brie. Okay, well, you know, look, you see, these big supermarkets, they've been through various conflicts all over the world, wars, trade deals, trade disputes, everything. But the stuff still flows onto the shelves unimpeded. And the European Union UK dispute is trivial compared with a lot of stuff that happens around the world on a daily basis. And Sainsbury's sort it out, and they will still sort it out.
Well, one of the
These are scare stories, you know.
I completely agree. And the thing is, I mean, like 70% of our food comes from outside of the EU anyway. So 70% of what's on the shelf at the moment can be guaranteed to be there.
That's right.
And
furthermore, the price will go down because they have to pay the 23% or whatever it is.
Absolutely, and
I think it is 23%, isn't it?
And South America is queuing up to sell us cheese and beef, which is a lot of what we get from Ireland. And I mean, we just are obviously in the strong position here, because if we threaten no deal, the European Union stands to lose so much. I mean, they're losing our financial input generally, which they need, because that's going to be German, French, Italian and Dutch taxpayers that's going to go on the back of. And there are enough problems in those countries financially.
Well,
and it's going to destroy Ireland.
Netherlands farmers are revolting, blocking the streets with tractors, massive demonstrations.
And the French are still burning Paris. The German economy is dipping into a recession, and Italy has recently had Salvini, who's essentially in revolt against the European Union anyway. So the idea that the Remainers seem to view the European Union as this giant homogenous block that's impenetrable, and it's totally vulnerable. Totally vulnerable.
Very vulnerable.
And we could be leveraging that to get just a fair deal, not even to hurt them, you know, just to get a fair deal. But this is the problem. This is why I find Jeremy so frustrating, because you can tell that underneath all of the sort of like the new progressivism that's been laid on top of Labour. There is the sort of core of the sort of, I guess we call it a pro-British attitude rather than a pro-continent attitude.
Yeah.
And that you can see that he's struggling with this.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
And the taking the no deal off the table, that just, there's something about that grinds me. 'Cause it's like, Jeremy, you know that's the wrong tactic. You know that's wrong.
Well, there's big pressures in the party, and
Yeah,
you know, certain things come about. Well, I hope we can see through it somehow. But I would repeat that whatever happens, he's going to be the best leader to negotiate with the chaos of the future.
One of the things that I notice, and I think we'll agree on, is that the main issue is not now left or right politics, party politics. It's now, as you termed it before we started this conversation, accountability versus globalization. Would you like to expand on your view of that?
Yes, both the main parties have got splits in them between globalist Remainers who support the UN, EU, mega corporation domination of the world and actually reduction of living standards of ordinary people. That's what it means. That's one group, and the other group are basically support national British interest, national capital, keeping jobs here, defending our services against foreign competition which would reduce standards and privatise them and so on. So there's splits in both the parties, and to call one of those, you see, the Remainists say they're left, but you know, I mean, a lot of what they do, which includes beating up people in the streets of Paris and parts of Spain, just for protesting against the European Union austerity programs. I mean, I can't describe that as left wing. That's right wing, to my view. I mean, it's so these left versus right labels are now misrepresented. I mean, you see, a lot of what Donald Trump says sometimes, there's people in the Republicans who say, oh, that's communist.
Yeah.
You know, well,
Yeah.
it could be, in a sense, he wants jobs. Well, okay, that's a left-wing policy, or it used to be. Well, it is, to the normal definition of left, but in America, that's left is somehow trash these people. I mean, it doesn't make sense. So we've got to get rid of those labels and have accountability, which means you vote for what you get and you get what you vote for, and if they don't do what they say, they should be removed. That is accountability, and the globalisation is about, you can see it happening, it's taking away sovereignty. It means the European Union laws overcome British laws. And as we speak, there's lots of ways in which that is very bad for Britain. For example, Grenfell Tower. The regulations about cladding under the old British standards meant that flammable cladding would have been illegal. But the European Union legislation said it was okay.
Really? I didn't
That is
know
absolutely true, and I can give you the
I
on
trust
it.
you.
I will. Obviously, the councils are going to allow whatever's cheapest.
Yes.
So, you know. And anyway, the European Union says it's all right, let's do it, you see? So they believe these things. Well, okay. I mean, I'm not giving them any excuse, because that council has a lot of appalling things about the way they handle housing in general. But, you know, they have excuses on a plate given to them by the European Union. So that's why I say it's accountability versus globalisation.
And I think that's a much more accurate way of describing what's happening, because I mean, my personally, you know, I'm as a liberal, I'm looking at the European Union and thinking no taxation without representation, because we don't vote for the lawmakers, and you know, it's the most sort of basic liberal perspective.
What happened to democracy?
Yeah, exactly. But the issue of globalization, I think, is a fascinating one, and really ties into many of the problems. One of the things that you said you were well versed in is the housing shortage and the housing crisis. And I view this as a consequence of globalization, because we've got theoretically a declining population. We've got a sub-replacement birth rate. So really we should be asking ourselves, why are we constantly building hundreds of thousands of new houses? And the consequence of that is obviously, the reason for that is mass immigration creates an artificial demand for houses. And then you have that dovetailing with the issue that foreign interests, say Russian and Saudi Arabian, big big money is buying up large tracts of housing in the country and then subletting it or speculating on it. What am I right? Is this?
Well, partly, but the housing crisis is not as simple as that. Obviously, there are pressures for anyone who wants to live here or work here. They have to live somewhere. But the overriding facts of the housing crisis are, one, there's enough empty housing in London, empty commercial properties in London which could be converted to housing to hold 400,000 families. And that is not something the councils are dealing with. Secondly, that these Russians and Saudis that you mentioned, they haven't come over here to buy and build properties to rent to workers from foreign parts or whatever. They've come here to buy and build to keep these empty, to watch them grow in value for enhanced profits. And the London Borough of Southwark, well, all of them along the river, are aiding and abetting speculators to build empty properties which keep empty. And you just you go on the trains from Waterloo and you see it's horrific. You see these empty buildings. So that is the main driving force of the housing crisis. You see, we live in a time now where it's cheaper than it's ever been to build housing, ever in the history, in a million years, right? But we've got the biggest housing crisis ever in London. And it is entirely driven, well, you had a small percentage maybe, but 99% driven by property speculation. And quite frankly, if the governments want to solve the housing crisis, they could say in one fell swoop, all these empty properties built by speculators are going to be requisitioned, and we're putting them anybody who needs housing, and there'll be adequate housing overnight.
See, when you say requisitioned, what do you exactly mean by that?
Okay, it could be many things. During the war, you see, I use that phrase because empty properties were requisitioned, and families who had rooms were told they'd be billeted, and people would be put there to get out of London.
That's in a time of crisis.
In the time of crisis, yeah. Well, they say there's a housing crisis. There's a solution. They're building these empty properties. Take them. Okay, requisition would be literally means taking them away and making the council own them. Perhaps it needn't be that. It could be the council has got rights to put people in there and manage them.
I mean, I'm looking at this from the free market perspective.
Of course,
and suggesting and so to me, government requisition of property, even if I don't agree with the way it's being used, I'm dubious about, because I think it sets negative precedents. And
well, let's say government, forced management of this,
even
whatever.
if it was just purchasing it, Like, I appreciate.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
well,
that's
purchasing,
not,
but then
yeah.
what are they going to pay? Because the so-called market value is enormous.
That's true, but it's kind of a rod we've made for our own back, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I mean, fundamentally,
but it's a fake cost. If they paid what it cost, that'd be fine. I wouldn't have a problem with that. Or if they're going to pay for it at the so-called market rents, well, you could ask the Bank of England or tell the Bank of England to print the money for it. Okay, this would cause inflation. But I would say okay. But I don't mind if they're paid a cost.
The argument from the Conservative side.
I want practical use. Yeah. No, I take what you're saying about.
But it really does get down to the sort of bottom of it: is why are we allowing property speculators who have probably never even been to the country to buy up large areas of London? Because I mean, the more property that is owned and speculated on reduces just the amount of livable land in London and makes it more difficult for the regular Londoner to buy property. It increases the value of everything around it.
I agree. Well, there's two forces going. One is, just any speculator will go anywhere to make money. And
of course.
Big major cities are doing that. But they're aided and abetted by the policies of the United Nations, known as Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030, which are that people have to be removed from the countryside and shoved into towns, and we've got to live in smaller and smaller spaces. And it's all built on the ideology that man is a problem, causing problem and causing climate change. Now, these are complete lies, total anti-science, but that's what they're using as the stick to beat people with.
Right.
And the consequences are the super rich get richer. I mean, the way the super rich get their money, they've got, rivers of money coming up for one high prices of energy to property. Those two avenues of super rich are crucial, and the climate policies, the fake man-made climate change policy, builds them both. It builds high energy prices, and it forces this type of speculation in cities because they link it with the Agenda 21, which is based on the idea that mankind is a problem. No, I don't think mankind is a problem.
No, I agree.
Mankind has many problems he makes,
yes,
but to blame the whole world situation on them is ridiculous. Look, there will be crises, but extinction crisis. There's no extinction crisis caused by man, completely none. In fact, a lot of species are doing better because of mankind's management. But if you want a crisis, you've got to look at the skies, and you'll have an asteroid hitting you someday. And the big extinction events of 13,000 years ago were probably caused by a gigantic asteroid.
There is a very interesting case that happened recently of a Canadian academic who was fired from the university at which they worked as a researcher because their research had shown that polar bear populations are thriving.
Ah, yes.
And the thing that would made the populations bounce back is a lack of hunting. They're forbidden from hunting. And now the polar bear population is at record levels. And they got fired for saying this because of a National Geographic, just kind of a clip that went viral, that they think had somewhere around the region of like 2 billion views of this of this polar bear starving. And they were saying, well, this is because of climate change, this is because there's no ice around. And I mean, it's just one example of an unfortunate polar bear that obviously was, probably nearing the end of its life.
Well, he was a sick polar bear, that's all he was. I mean, it's like picturing an old man in London and saying, well, this is proving something, the world is ending, the human race is dying. Well, or they tell us, look at this ice that's fallen off Greenland, it's 4,000 years old. Okay, well, if you see a tree blow over, it's 100 years old. You say, is this the biggest gale for 100 years?
No. It's hysteria.
All the ice that flows off Greenland is 4,000 years old because it takes that long for ice to flow from the centre to the edge.
But this is the thing, because instead of accepting the data on polar bears, for example, in this case, she was fired. And that, to me, speaks of a kind of protectionist, almost cult-like mentality when it comes to this sort of stuff.
Well, it is. Look, academic freedom, supposedly valued in Britain, is under, well, it hardly exists now, frankly, or in any of the Western so-called institutions. You see, she's not the only one that was sacked. We had the case of Professor Pidd in Queensland. He pointed out that coral reefs are doing fine, and the whole logical argument produced that coral reefs have been damaged by manned CO2 is factual nonsense. He got the sack. He got reinstated by a court.
That's crazy.
There's other disputes in Canada again. There was the big court case of man versus ball, where that graph, which I mentioned before, maybe where the so-called hockey stick graph of, is that the camera there? Where the upper graph there shows that, according to the IPCC, that's the United Nations Climate Panel, that we've had uniform temperatures for 1,000 years and then they've suddenly gone up due to man. But the reality is something different, i.e. we've had a medieval warm period which is much warmer.
I mean, I don't know anything about...
But anyway, the point was there's a big court case about that, which showed that the top graph is fraud.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know anything about the climate science, but I do know a fair amount about the history of the last 1,000 years. And anyone who studied the history of it knows about the ice on the Thames and how they used to hold Victorian fairs there.
Of course.
And how we grew grapes in Manchester and places like this.
That's right. There's been hotter periods and colder periods.
Yeah. So the idea that it's been fairly stable for the last 1,000 years is obvious nonsense, just from any cursory reading of history. But this is the thing, isn't it? I'm happy to believe that there could be. I mean, like I said, I don't know anything about the science of it, so I can only accept the word of experts on it. But I'm happy to believe that there could be something involved in it. But then I see all this duplicity. And another thing that someone pointed out to me the other day is just check at where they start the graphs. And then go back like
where to start the graphs.
I actually did this. I went and had a look, and then wow, it doesn't look so bad if you start the graphs a few hundred years earlier, does it?
If you go back further, if you go back to as far as the medieval warm period, we've temperatures have fallen
Yes.
since then. I mean,
So it's-
and CO2's gone up since then.
Yeah,
In fact, I've got loads of graphs in this little booklet, which I would
Yeah.
recommend.
Oh, thank you.
Man-made climate change does not exist, and it's by myself, and this is published. The article originally was published in the Reading University Debating Journal. And we've also got printouts as PDFs, and if you go to weatheraction.com, you can get directly to the University of Reading Debating Society and also to a PDF, which we
And
produced.
I just want to stress that I'm not validating
No,
or denying
no, no, no.
or any of the information.
People can read it for
on science.
themselves.
I am no expert at all, but I'm very concerned about because the reason that I wanted to talk to you about this is, like I said, not because of any personal interest in the meat of the debate, but because I can see it being misrepresented. I mean, you hear 99% of scientists agree that.
Well, it isn't true.
Well, yeah,
It's
I looked into it.
0.3% agree, but that
Yeah.
figure is dealt with in here.
Right. Okay. Because this is the thing. I don't believe that the other side is getting a fair hearing, and there's been an actual large degree of misinformation and what I would call academic malfeasance, as we've covered, in regards to people who are not even saying it's not happening, but just have data that counteract their narrative. And if you've got to the point where you're essentially being tyrannical against dissenters, then there's something more that needs to be talked about. And regardless of your agreement on or not on the topic, these views have to be aired in a fair way. That's my view.
I agree with you completely. And on the issue of opinion polls in science is not an opinion poll.
No.
If it was, then Galileo, well,
Then the
would
Pope
have
was
been
right to
taught-
lock him up, yeah.
Well, he was shown the instruments of torture and shut up.
Yeah.
And at that time, I dare say, he wasn't even described as a scientist. The truth was controlled by the Pope and his entourage.
Yep.
So, I would say 100% of scientists said that the sun goes around the Earth.
Well, yeah.
And that was the end of the story. So if you see, consensus in the history of the world has never advanced science. Consensus is the end of science.
And it's worth talking about the past predictions that were based on the scientific consensus as well, because you probably know this a lot better than I do. But I looked into this recently. They've all been wrong, haven't they?
Yeah, both have been wrong. We're going to see the end of snow by 2010.
Yeah.
We've had more snow. We're going to have runaway warming. No. Satellite data shows we've got cooling. We were going to have more hurricanes in America, and they're very, very well counted in America. We've had less hurricanes in America.
Yeah.
So all their, scary predictions have failed.
I mean, like my dad was telling me how in the 70s they were predicting an ice age.
They
And
were,
so
they were.
I went and looked up, and you've got New York Times articles.
Oh, yeah.
Scientists foresee ice age coming. And then Al Gore in like 2000 saying, well, by 2010 there won't be any ice on the polar caps.
That's what he said.
And yeah, no, he said this.
Oh, I know.
And I was just like, right, okay, these are bold predictions that in only a decade did not come to pass, and yet no one wants to talk about it.
That's right. Well, the Extinction Rebellion is the boldest of bold predictions, which is like the ultimate.
yeah, we're all
the
gonna
end is
die.
coming. The
Yeah.
end is nigh. I mean, it's religious madness.
Yeah.
But there are children who believe it,
Why
which is
wouldn't they?
very sad.
The adults around them are,
What
are
do
giving
children know?
Well, exactly. They don't know anything. And it really is taking on the sort of form of a religion. This
It is
something
a
that
religion, yeah.
Michael Knowles at the at Politicon recently actually gave a really great, because he's a Catholic, and he laid it out and said, look,
Oh, right.
you've effectively
Okay.
recreated Catholicism with climate change. You've got the sort of apocalyptic eschatology. You've got a form of indulgences. You combine them from carbon taxes.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
an unquestionable dogma. There's actually an inquisition surrounding it, so academics have got
there
to keep
is.
their mouths
There is
shut.
an
And
inquisition.
it genuinely is taking on the form of like the Catholic Church for
No,
this
that's
kind of
true.
topic. And even if all of their data was correct, I would have to oppose what they're doing by the methods by which they're doing
Yeah,
it. you know?
that's very fair.
I
because,
think that's just wrong on the face of it, whether or not the debate is correct.
See, if I was still, I've taught in universities and so forth, and colleges, but if I was still if I was employed in a university now, I wouldn't be able to say what I'm doing and
No.
keep my job. There's just completely no way. It's because I'm doing independent research and funded by people who buy a forecast that I can say what I like.
Well, this is the opinion that I've encountered in British universities and American universities. I've just got back from the US where I did sort of a mini college tour.
Oh,
and
okay.
at all of these universities, the political homogeneity of the campus is something that all of the people who came to hear me talk were very, very firm on. And I believe that they're representing what's happening. They say if you aren't a sort of radical left progressive who believes in globalization and the man-made climate change, you are in trouble. There's a
That's
sort of,
right. Yeah,
there's a very specific
You're
set.
going to be far right or something.
Absolutely, yeah, far right. There's a very specific set of beliefs that you have to adhere to, or you're in some serious trouble. And they, I mean, when I go there, obviously they're quite angry.
It's like a catechism, a raft, of
yes,
beliefs.
Yes, exactly. It's a catechism. That's exactly it. But so where do you see all of this going?
Well, the this grip of globalist ideology has to be broken. I think there's 2 weak points to it, or 3 weak points. The European Union dictatorship is one. The climate fake science is another one. And the third thing is 5G, where 5G has been imposed.
Yeah.
Supposedly smart meters are to, save the planet, but they are organs of control. They're spy machines in everybody's home, and the rays involved in 5G are dangerous. And in setting up 5G things also means chopping down lots of trees because they need more and more line of sight communication. And there's a lot of opposition to 5G growing up from below. And I think those 3 things I mentioned. Possibly 5G will be the one that takes off, and then people will realise where it comes from. Namely, it's part of Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030, which is meant to save the planet, but there's a complete contradiction, you see. The Green Party or other green policies as well support 5G because it's part of saving the planet. Well, actually, but it means killing insects. And it means chopping down trees. I mean, there's a complete contradiction.
Yeah, I haven't looked into the 5G thing much, but what I saw was
have a look. It's interesting stuff.
What I saw was them putting up the 5G nodes or whatever they are, and the people dressed in essentially they look like they're about to go into Fukushima or something in these radiation suits.
Exactly.
And I suppose the thing that I was thinking is, okay, well, the real test is, are they going to have 5G nodes in places like Beverly Hills or Kensington or something like that, or are they just going to be in the poor areas? That to me strikes me as the real test.
I think you might be right. You might well be right that there won't be. I mean, I don't know if these things are true, but people say that, the super rich in California don't allow their children to have mobile phones or anything till they're 12 years old.
That's completely true, yeah. Bill Gates doesn't allow his children to have smartphones.
There must be a reason for that.
Oh yeah, I'm not going to let my children have smartphones just because Bill Gates isn't allowing his. He must know something I don't.
Well, that's right, that's right.
But right, Piers, thank you very much. This has been a very fascinating conversation.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.